Nature's beauty hides a brutal side, where one wrong move can mean life or death. From a hunter's desperate fight against a 1,400-pound grizzly in the Wrangell Mountains to families running for their lives as a raging Denali bear smashes through RVS, these encounters reveal how fragile safety truly is. In this video, we'll relive 6 shocking bear attacks that prove survival is never guaranteed in the wild. Marcus Hale had been told for years that his rifle belonged in a museum, that trusting an old Winchester Model 70, chambered in .375H and H Magnum, was foolish when modern rifles offered precision, optics, and lighter recoil. But Marcus had always believed that his grandfather's rifle held something more valuable than technology. It carried a memory, a quiet history of hunts through the Wrangell Mountains of Alaska, in an era when men faced wilderness on its own terms. The walnut stock was worn smooth by decades of hands, the bolt stiff from age but still firm. Each autumn, Marcus stripped it down, oiled every part, and admired how the steel still gleamed. He felt connected to something older when he carried it, and when September 12, 2024 arrived and the season opened in the remote interior, he packed the rifle. He drove north, determined to track one of the great bears said to prowl near a river where salmon runs had thickened after a wet summer. He hiked for hours through thickets of alder and spruce, the air thick with the smell of rotten fish, the mud heavy beneath his boots. He was alone, as he always preferred, moving quietly, reading signs the way his grandfather had taught him. The dark piles of scat heavy with berries, the gouges on tree trunks where massive claws had raked through bark, the flattened grass where something large had rested. By late afternoon, he reached a bend in the river where the water slowed and salmon flopped against the gravel banks. He noticed overturned fish, bones gnawed to splinters, and fresh paw prints the size of plates pressed into the mud. The tracks were enormous, far larger than anything he had seen in past seasons, and the thought made his pulse quicken. Marcus crouched near the prints and felt the damp air press around him. He knew from the size and the deep impressions that the bear was large and heavy, possibly weighing over 1,200 pounds. He moved carefully, lifting each foot in silence, scanning the brush for motion. The evening light dimmed into a dull amber glow, and the shadows of spruce needles stretched long across the stones. Ravens circled overhead, their calls echoing off the valley walls. Marcus followed the river another 100 yards until the smell of fish and musk grew stronger, a sour, dense scent that clung to his clothes. He froze when a crashing noise erupted through the brush ahead, branches breaking like kindling. And then silence. He steadied the rifle, raised the barrel toward the sound, and waited, heart thundering so hard he could feel the pulse in his throat. The forest went quiet except for the steady roll of the river. Then the bear stepped out. It was a massive grizzly, dark brown with a silvered hump and scars streaking its shoulders, each movement slow and deliberate. Its head swung from side to side as if it were measuring him, the thick fur on its neck shifting with each breath. Marcus knew at once that this was no ordinary bear. This was the kind of giant that existed in stories and photographs, a relic of an older wilderness. For a few seconds, neither moved. Then the bear lowered its head and began to approach, first walking, then loping, and then suddenly breaking into a charge that sent pebbles flying and branches whipping. The sound was enormous, a deep, pounding rush of power that filled the clearing like thunder. Marcus aimed, his mind narrowing to the front sight, the silver bead hovering over the broad chest that surged toward him. He squeezed the trigger, and the Winchester erupted with a roar, the recoil slamming into his shoulder. But the bear didn't slow. It was coming faster, closing the distance, the ground shaking beneath its weight. Its jaws were wide, its teeth flashing. Marcus worked the bolt, feeling the old mechanism grind but hold firm, chambering another round. He fired again, the shot echoing off the cliffs, and saw the bullet strike just below the shoulder, the impact spraying mud and fur. The bear stumbled but kept coming, bellowing in pain, closing to 20 feet, then 15. He could see the foam and blood at its mouth, smell its breath thick with rot and fish, feel the vibration of its charge through the soles of his boots. He lifted the rifle again and fired a third time, hitting higher, driving the bullet through the thick muscle of the neck. The bear crashed down in a violent slide, rolling, clawing at the ground, trying to rise again but failing as the energy drained from its limbs. It groaned, a low, guttural sound that faded into the steady rush of the river. Marcus stood frozen, every muscle locked, the rifle still shouldered as smoke drifted from the muzzle. The clearing was filled with silence except for his heavy breathing and the hiss of insects rising from the grass. He waited minutes before lowering the gun, stepping closer, and watching the enormous body settle into stillness. When he finally approached, the scale of it stunned him. The bear's forearm was thicker than his leg, its claws curved like knives, each one longer than his fingers. The fur was matted and scarred, testifying to years of fighting and survival. He knelt beside it, resting his hand on the hide, and for a long moment he felt neither triumph nor fear, only a deep respect, a quiet understanding that this creature had ruled this valley long before him. The air around him smelled of blood and river water, and the evening had turned to a cold blue dusk. It took him nearly 2 hours to drag the carcass to higher ground and mark the location with his GPS. When he finally radioed in the coordinates to the ranger station the next morning, his voice was calm but tired, each word clipped by exhaustion. It took a team of biologists and officers a full day to reach the site, and when they measured the bear, it weighed just under 1,400 pounds, one of the largest grizzlies recorded in the Wrangell Range in decades. They photographed the scene, took samples, and shook their heads at the size of the tracks, which were deeply imprinted in the mud. Marcus stood quietly nearby, watching the light reflect off the rifle he had cleaned so many times. Its metal was dull but steadfast, its history now extended by one final story. He thought of his grandfather hunting these same mountains with the same rifle, facing the same fear and awe, and knew that if the old man had been there, he would have simply nodded in quiet pride, saying nothing at all. Naomi Carter had spent years guiding travelers through the wildest corners of Alaska, teaching them that adventure was only safe when balanced with respect for the unpredictable power of nature. She had seen storms roll in without warning, avalanches thunder down slopes she had climbed days earlier, and bears cross rivers that seemed to belong to no one but them. Yet on October 3, 2025, as she supervised a bungee jump near a remote riverbank north of Talkeetna, she felt confident that this site was among the safest she'd ever managed. The weather was calm, the crew experienced, the equipment tested and checked, and the tourists eager to leap from the high basalt ledge that dropped nearly 200 feet into a misty gorge where salmon thrashed in shallow pools. It was supposed to be another routine day in Alaska's endless wilderness, thrilling but controlled, where adrenaline met order and nothing unexpected ever slipped through. The morning had started crisp and clear, the air tinged with the metallic scent of river water and the faint sweetness of spruce. Naomi checked the ropes, double-tied the anchors, and watched as her team prepared the first jumper. The sound of rushing water below blended with laughter and the soft click of carabiners. On the far side of the river, dense alder thickets formed a green wall that rustled occasionally, a sound she barely noticed. When the first jumper dove, arms wide, the long cord stretched in a perfect arc, and for a few seconds, the world seemed still except for the echo of joy bouncing across the cliffs. Then, as the jumper swung back toward the landing zone, Naomi caught sight of something moving near the edge of the trees. At first, she thought it was just a shadow shifting in the light, but the movement persisted. Slow, heavy, deliberate. A large brown bear emerged, its fur damp and matted, its shoulders rolling under thick muscle. It sniffed the air and paused, head tilted, as if deciding whether to continue. Naomi froze, the clipboard slipping from her hand, her body reacting before her mind did. The bear was no more than 40 yards away, massive even by Alaskan standards, likely drawn by the strong scent of fish coming from the river, or perhaps by the faint smell of food packed in the crew's backpacks left near the rope station. The animal stepped forward, nose twitching, eyes dark and focused. It moved toward the cluster of bags, sniffing one and pawing at another, its claws curling through the fabric with a quiet tearing sound. Naomi's chest tightened as she realized the bear was between her and the landing zone where the jumper would touch down within seconds. If the animal became startled or aggressive, there would be no time to pull anyone to safety. She scanned for the rifle they kept near the truck, but it was too far, locked in a case. The bear was calm but curious, circling the equipment, pawing at a helmet, and nudging a rope coil with its snout. Naomi took a step forward, her instinct telling her to protect the gear and keep the bear from tangling in the ropes. But her boots slipped on the wet, slick stone, slick with spray from the gorge. She stumbled, one knee striking rock, the sharp edge cutting through her pants. The sound startled the bear, which turned sharply, its ears raised and nostrils flaring. It huffed, a deep sound that vibrated through her chest, then took 2 fast strides toward her. Naomi scrambled backward, slipping again, gravel scattering under her palms. The bear swiped with its right paw, a motion more warning than attack, but the power behind it was immense. The claws grazed her thigh, tearing through the fabric and slicing shallowly into her skin, while the force of the swing threw her sideways into the rock face. Her arm scraped along jagged stone, opening a raw abrasion that burned as if on fire. She hit the ground hard, dazed, pain radiating from her leg and shoulder. The bear stopped a few feet away, snorting, its breath steaming in the cold air. It seemed uncertain now, lowering its head, sniffing the air again. Naomi lay still, her heartbeat loud in her ears, trying not to move. The jumper above finished his swing and began to lower, outing with exhilaration, completely unaware of what was unfolding below. The sound of his laughter echoed through the canyon, mixing with the deep grunt of the bear. For a moment, Naomi feared that the noise would startle it again, but instead the animal turned slightly, drawn by the smell of the river. The bear moved closer to the bank, stepping into shallow water, splashing lightly as it searched for salmon. It caught one in a quick swipe, crushing the fish in its jaws, and for several tense minutes it stayed there, feeding, ignoring the motionless woman nearby. Naomi tried to steady her breathing, every muscle trembling, her palms slick with blood and river spray. She knew bears often acted out of curiosity rather than aggression, but she also knew that a single wrong move could instantly shift that balance. When the jumper reached the landing mat, one of the crew shouted up for assistance, unaware that the reason Naomi hadn't responded was only 30 feet away, chewing through fish bones with a deep cracking sound. The bear lifted its head again, watching them, its muzzle red, and Naomi could feel the tension stretch through the air like a cord ready to snap. Then, without warning, it turned and lumbered back toward the alders, its enormous body swaying with each step, vanishing into the green as silently as it had come. Naomi stayed down for a long minute before pushing herself upright. Her leg throbbed, blood staining her boot, and her right arm burned from the abrasion. The air around her was heavy with the scent of fish and damp earth. She looked toward the trees, half expecting the bear to return, but the forest remained still. The rest of the team finally noticed her limp in the torn fabric, rushing over as their faces shifted from confusion to shock as they pieced together what had happened. She sat on the ground, trembling, as adrenaline faded and pain replaced it. The bear was gone, yet its presence still filled the air, an invisible weight that hung over the canyon. Later, as she cleaned her wounds by the river and watched the water darken around her boots, she thought about how quickly safety could vanish in the wild, how the line between control and chaos was as thin as a slick patch of stone. Even with experience, preparation, and calm, the wilderness always had the final say. By evening, the crew packed up and left the site early, silence replacing the earlier excitement. Naomi looked back at the empty cliff, at the ropes hanging motionless in the wind, and understood something she had always taught others but never truly felt until then, that in Alaska, adventure and danger lived side by side, and sometimes, no matter how carefully you planned, nature reminded you who was really in charge. Marcus Lindell had worked in polar regions long enough to know that nothing there truly belonged to humans, not even a small patch of frozen sea where his research shack rested. On February 18, 2022, the wind off the Barents Sea was calm, the deceptive stillness of the Arctic making the day almost gentle. Inside his narrow wooden structure, Marcus cataloged fish samples pulled from ice earlier that morning, carefully labeling each container before stacking them near a crate of bait. The air smelled of salt, blood, and fish, the pungent scent lingering on his gloves. The shack was built for efficiency, not comfort. Plywood walls layered with insulation, metal bracing, and a floor covered in ice mats made movement safer. He had reinforced the door with aluminum strips after hearing stories of polar bears prying into similar shelters, confident in the structure's strength. Yet even reinforced walls could not erase the wild unpredictability of the Arctic. As the pale blue daylight began to fade into the gray half-light of a Svalbard February, Marcus crouched near his ice hole, checking the final traps. The heater hummed quietly, frosting the windows. Then came a sharp crack from outside, followed by a heavy crunch in the snow. His first thought was shifting ice, but the sound repeated, closer now, deliberate and powerful. His body tensed, every muscle locking. Suddenly, a massive white paw smashed through the thin wall panel, splintering wood and insulation in a single motion. Splinters and ice shards flew across the shack, cutting his forearms and hands. The bear's enormous claws shredded a crate, sending contents scattering across the floor. The smell of fish intensified, filling the room with a scent that had drawn the predator from miles away. Marcus scrambled toward the door, slipping on the frozen mat, his mind narrowing to instinct, barricade, and survive. He shoved heavy crates against the entrance, forming a makeshift wall. The bear pressed its black-nosed snout through the gap, sniffing, eyes glinting, breath steaming in the cold air. Each swipe of its paw flexed the wall, sending vibrations through the floor that rattled his teeth. For 15 tense minutes, the predator circled the shack. It pawed at the walls, tested seams, and snapped its jaws. Each movement, a display of raw power. Marcus crouched behind his barricade, heart hammering, every nerve alert to the creak of wood and scrape of claws. One false move could have caused the entire structure to collapse. The bear's sheer size and patience made the seconds unbearably long. A box of tools fell to the floor, clattering against the ice, and the bear responded with a violent blow, widening the gap in the wall. Snow drifted inside around its shoulders, and shards of insulation floated in the air. Marcus reached for a flare gun, fumbling with numb fingers, and aimed toward the opening. Sparks streaked outside, just as distant shouts rose from a neighboring camp. Someone had noticed the commotion. The bear paused, head tilting toward the light, uncertain. Another flare hissed across the twilight, scattering sparks over the snow. Marcus froze as the predator stepped back, sniffing and turning. Slowly, it began to retreat, lumbering across the snow toward the open tundra. Every step reverberated across the icy plain, its immense weight imprinting deep tracks in the snow. When silence returned, Marcus pushed aside crates and stepped outside, blood streaking his gloves and arms from cuts and scrapes. Torn insulation and splintered plywood littered the ground around the shack. The bear's tracks led into the distance, fading into the white expanse as if nothing had happened at all. Marcus stayed there for long moments, shivering from cold and adrenaline, staring across the frozen plain. The wind carried the faint scent of fish and wood splinters, reminders of the encounter. Even reinforced shelters, he realized, offered only a fragile sense of security against a predator of such size and determination. Later, at the backup camp, he cleaned his wounds, applying antiseptic and wrapping torn gloves around his raw palms. His body trembled from exertion and fear, but the thought that lingered most was not the pain. It was the bear's strength, the methodical way it had pressed against the walls, testing every weakness. No measurement, no label, no reinforced board could replicate the terror of being under the weight of pure, deliberate power. That night, as he wrote the log for the research station, Marcus recorded every detail: the time, the sequence of events, the bear's movements, and the damage to the shack. Each entry was meticulous, yet he knew words could not capture the true magnitude of what had happened, the way the Arctic had reminded him of its dominance. Outside, the wind began to erase footprints in the snow, swallowing the evidence of the day. The bear was gone, the shack damaged, but the lesson endured. In the Arctic, the balance of survival remained delicate, and the raw force of nature never waited for human readiness. Marcus finally leaned back against the tent wall, staring at the frozen horizon, his mind replaying every second of the encounter. The air smelled faintly of ice and blood, and the sun's pale light faded behind the distant mountains. Though he had survived, he knew how easily the balance could have shifted, how thin the line was between safety and disaster in the frozen north. The bear had returned to the wild, but its presence lingered, a reminder that even the most careful human plans could be undone in an instant by sheer, unbridled strength. On a warm evening, July 22, 2018, the Johnson family hosted a summer barbecue in a small clearing near their New Hampshire cabin, where pine trees framed the sky and the distant hum of cicadas filled the air. Smoke curled from the grill, mingling with the scent of sizzling meat, while children ran barefoot through the grass, laughing and chasing one another, their voices carrying across the clearing. Picnic tables were stacked with plates, coolers, and condiments, the atmosphere calm and familiar, the kind of ordinary summer evening that felt timeless and safe, insulated from the dense woods surrounding them. Unseen in those trees, a large black bear moved silently through the underbrush, guided by instinct and an acute sense of smell. It was massive, heavily muscled, and its glossy black fur reflected slivers of sunlight as it advanced, sniffing the air for the irresistible aroma of cooked meat. Drawn closer by the scent of the grill and the warmth of human activity, the bear paused at the tree line, assessing the space before taking cautious steps into the clearing. Its presence went unnoticed by the family, whose attention was absorbed by laughter, food, and children darting across the yard. Then, without warning, the bear charged. It crashed through a stack of folding chairs, splintering wood with explosive force, and pawed at the grill, sending embers and smoke into the air. Children screamed and scattered, parents shouted and tried to herd them to safety, and chaos rippled across the yard. Mark Johnson, 38, moved instinctively toward his children, scooping one up while guiding the others away. His foot caught on a tangled extension cord near the grill, and he tripped, sprawling onto the grass. The bear reacted instantly. It swiped with a massive paw, striking Mark and knocking him to the ground. With teeth bared and muscles coiled, it mauled him with brutal force, tearing through clothing and flesh in a series of devastating strikes. Each movement reverberated across the clearing, shaking the earth beneath its weight and knocking over the objects it struck. Chairs, a cooler, and scattered utensils were smashed or flung aside. The children's screams echoed as Mark struggled beneath the assault, helpless against the animal's raw power. Neighbors called 911, alerted by the commotion. Still, by the time authorities arrived, the bear had retreated into the dense forest, disappearing among the trees with the ease of a predator returning to its domain. Paramedics worked quickly, but the injuries inflicted were catastrophic. Deep lacerations, broken bones, and blunt trauma left Mark fatally wounded, and the clearing, once filled with laughter and summer warmth, became a scene of grief and horror. Investigators later examined the site, noting the overturned chairs, destroyed grill, and paw prints pressed deep into the soft soil. They confirmed that black bears, though generally timid and avoidant of humans, could become deadly when motivated by food or provoked by human presence. The combination of scent, curiosity, and proximity had created a lethal scenario, one that even experienced outdoor residents like the Johnsons could not fully anticipate. The children, safe but shaken, remembered an evening that had begun with play and joy, now overshadowed by terror and loss. Friends and neighbors gathered cautiously, still processing the sudden, violent intrusion into what had been an ordinary family gathering. Emergency personnel meticulously documented the scene, recording every footprint, every splintered chair, and every mark in the grass. Yet even their detailed accounts could not convey the sheer speed and power of the attack. Experts noted that black bears, though rarely aggressive, could quickly become dangerous when food, human activity, and sudden proximity converged. Proper precautions, secure storage of edible items, and vigilance were essential. Yet encounters like this demonstrated the fragile line between safety and disaster in areas where humans and wildlife intersect. In the Johnsons' clearing, ordinary summer activity had collided with instinctual predator behavior, producing a fatal result in mere moments. Mark Johnson's instinctive courage, moving toward his children to protect them, stood in stark contrast to the bear's raw efficiency. The encounter illustrated the vulnerability of humans when confronted by even a typically non-aggressive species under the right conditions. Trees bore the marks of claws, the grill remained dented and scorched, and chairs lay broken across the yard, silent witnesses to the speed and force of the attack. The clearing, once a place of laughter, became a place of caution and reflection. Even months later, the faint impressions of paw prints in the soil were visible, a reminder of the bear's visit and a warning that wildlife maintained autonomy and power, regardless of human presence. The incident became part of local safety briefings and a solemn lesson in how ordinary, everyday life could turn deadly when humans underestimate the potential of a wild animal. For the Johnson family, the aftermath was a painful mixture of grief and shock. Their children were spared, yet haunted by what they had witnessed, clinging to the memory of a parent's sudden absence. Neighbors and extended family struggled to comprehend how a creature usually considered timid could inflict such destruction with speed and precision. Emergency responders emphasized that the encounter, although tragic, was not typical. Yet, it underscored a harsh reality in regions where humans and wildlife coexist. A single moment, a single lapse, could result in a catastrophic outcome. The clearing would never feel the same. Scorched earth, splintered wood, and the remnants of overturned chairs served as lasting reminders of the thin line between domestic calm and the lethal unpredictability of nature. Even in familiar surroundings, the power of a wild animal remained absolute. Though Mark Johnson's life ended that evening, his courage in shielding his children remained a testament to instinctive bravery when faced with extraordinary danger, while the bear, long gone, left behind lessons written in the soil, splintered boards, and the memory of a summer night transformed into tragedy. In August 2025, a remote RV park near Denali National Park buzzed with summer activity as campers unloaded coolers and chairs. Families stretched after long drives, and the faint sizzle of grills warmed under the high sun. The spruce forest bordering the campground swayed gently, shadows stretching across dirt roads and picnic areas, while the distant peaks of the Alaska Range rose jagged against the sky. Visitors moved between RVs and picnic tables, some setting up tents, others guiding children, oblivious to the massive presence watching from the tree line. A huge grizzly had been foraging along the forest edge for hours, drawn by the scent of food and the unmistakable aroma of human activity. Muscles rippling beneath thick fur, massive paws crunching on pine needles and cones. It assessed the clearing with patient intelligence, weighing risk and opportunity. At nearly 800 pounds, its size alone was intimidating, but its awareness and deliberate movements made it truly dangerous. The first sign of impending chaos came when a cooler tipped, spilling ice and food across the ground. A child screamed, and adults turned to see the massive bear emerging fully into the open. With explosive force, it charged between parked RVs, pawing grills, overturning chairs and tables, and slashing the sides of camper vans. Metal siding bore deep claw marks, coolers were crushed, and scattered utensils and plates littered the clearing. Screams filled the air as families scrambled toward RVs. One father, rushing to gather his children, tripped over a tent stake and fell to the ground. The bear reacted instantly, striking him with a bone-shaking blow, throwing him onto the dirt. Its claws tore through clothing and flesh, leaving deep gashes along his arms and shoulders, tearing muscle and skin with terrifying speed. Around him, tents collapsed, picnic gear lay in ruins, and coolers were upended under the bear's massive weight. Each movement demonstrated the raw power of an apex predator, turning a routine vacation into a scene of terror in seconds. Nearby visitors huddled inside RVs, trembling, as the bear pawed at another grill and sniffed overturned coolers. Its sheer size and strength made every action potentially catastrophic. Adrenaline and fear coursed through the campers as they watched the bear assert its dominance over what had been, moments ago, an ordinary recreational space. A park ranger arrived, firing warning shots into the air. The loud report startled the bear, which hesitated before retreating swiftly into the edge of the spruce forest, disappearing as silently as it had appeared. Campers began cautiously emerging from RVs, assessing damage and helping the injured man to safety. Blood streaked his arms and clothing, and bruises covered much of his body, but he survived. Carried to an RV where makeshift bandages were applied until emergency personnel arrived. The aftermath was chaotic. Several vehicles bore deep claw marks. Tents lay collapsed and shredded. Grills were overturned. Coolers were crushed, and personal belongings were scattered across the dirt. Campers, still shaken, counted themselves and assessed injuries, realizing how swiftly ordinary leisure could become a deadly encounter. Even experienced visitors felt the fragile line between safety and danger had been crossed in an instant. Authorities later examined the site, noting paw prints pressed deep into the soil, claw marks along vehicles, and the path of destruction. They confirmed that grizzly bears, while normally cautious of humans, could become dangerous when food, trash, and human activity converged. The bear's behavior had been motivated by hunger and opportunity, demonstrating how quickly instinctual responses could escalate into life-threatening situations. Experts emphasized that while attacks were rare, visitors in bear country must secure food properly, maintain awareness of surroundings, and respect wildlife. The convergence of unsecured food, accessible campers, and the bear's natural curiosity had created a perfect storm, resulting in a rapid escalation that left both property damaged and humans injured. In the matter of moments, a peaceful summer evening had transformed into chaos, leaving a lasting impression on those who witnessed it. For the injured man, his family, and other campers, the event left lingering trauma. Children, though unharmed, were shaken by the sight of the bear and the violence of the attack. Families processed grief, relief, and fear simultaneously, struggling to reconcile the sudden incursion of wild power into what they had considered a safe recreational space. Emergency personnel debriefed witnesses, noting both the immediacy of the threat and the unpredictability inherent in encounters with apex predators. By nightfall, the campground was quiet once more, the forest holding only the whispers of wind through spruce needles and distant wildlife. Visitors cleaned and packed, hearts still racing, realizing the true force of nature they had faced. Every claw mark, dented vehicle, and destroyed cooler stood as evidence that even structured, seemingly safe environments could be rendered vulnerable in seconds by a predator with instincts honed over millennia. The bear's presence lingered in memory long after it vanished. Campers left with the understanding that Alaska's wildlife operates on its own terms, where curiosity and hunger can rapidly become danger, and where vigilance, preparation, and respect are the only defenses against the immense power of an apex predator. Even a carefully planned vacation could be undone in a heartbeat, a sobering reminder that the wilderness, however accessible, remains wild and capable of overwhelming human control. On July 30th, 2021, guide Ben Harris navigated a small rafting group down a remote Alaskan river, its waters churning over jagged rocks and rushing in frothy rapids that cut through dense spruce forest, where the air was filled with the scent of pine, wet earth, and the distant aroma of salmon spawning along the shallow banks. The sun slanted low, casting elongated shadows across the river, and the group paddled with rhythm, skill, and alertness, each member aware of the swift current yet trusting in Ben's experience as a guide familiar with these waters. The river narrowed in sections, with whitecaps crashing around boulders, creating a raw, untamed soundtrack that underscored the beauty and danger of the wilderness. Ben's attention was split between reading the river and ensuring the participants maintained balance and control in the turbulent flow. Unbeknownst to them, a massive brown bear had been moving along the riverbank, attracted by the scent of packed lunches tucked in dry bags, the splash of water from fish breaking the surface, and the occasional smell of human presence carried by the wind. The bear's coat glimmered dark brown under the sunlight, its muscles rolling beneath thick fur as it stalked the edge of the current with deliberate, predatory patience, pausing to sniff the air and scan the group. Its size alone, easily approaching 800 pounds, made each step through the riverbank debris thunder underfoot. Yet, its movements were calculated, a combination of curiosity, hunger, and the confidence of an apex predator in its domain. The first sign of trouble came with a sudden rustle and the cracking of branches as the bear fully emerged onto the open bank, eyes fixed on the raft and the scattered belongings floating in shallow eddies. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as Ben assessed the situation, realizing the danger before it fully materialized. Then, with explosive speed, the bear lunged toward the nearest raft, its massive paw swiping at gear, knocking dry bags and coolers into the churning water. The raft rocked violently as the impact reverberated through its sides, and several members cried out instinctively, gripping the edges, paddles clattering into the water. Ben was partially thrown toward the shallow rapids, his shoulders scraping against jagged rocks hidden beneath the surface, pain shooting through his arm as the bear's claws tore into the raft's side. leaving deep gashes in the fabric and puncturing the flotation compartments. Water surged around him, icy and unforgiving, yet survival instinct overrode pain and shock. He scrambled to regain control, clutching ropes, adjusting paddles, and stabilizing the vessel as it spun under the assault. Every second waited with the knowledge that a single misstep could send him or a group member into the rocky current, vulnerable to both the water and the bear's power. For several tense minutes, the bear circled the raft, paws slapping against its sides, claws raking at floating equipment, jaws snapping at anything within reach. Its sheer size and unrelenting strength created a constant threat. Each movement could puncture the raft or toss a person into the current. The group's adrenaline surged with every second, their muscles tense and hearts hammering as they fought to remain upright. At the same time, the bear tested their resolve, its dark eyes glinting with curiosity and force. Gear floated downstream in fragmented pieces, coolers, backpacks, and personal belongings carried away by the river's pull, a chaotic trail marking the bear's brief dominion over the water. Ben barked instructions, pointing to stabilizing ropes and guiding paddles, each motion urgent yet precise, as he tried to maintain order amidst the pandemonium. The river, already unforgiving, became a secondary adversary, each rapid a reminder that survival depended on both human skill and an awareness of the unpredictable wild. The bear, undeterred, pawed again, snapping at a floating cooler, then at a paddle, leaving visible claw marks and punctures across the raft's outer fabric. Its presence was imposing, every action a combination of raw strength, instinctual aggression, and the unpredictable logic of a creature unaccustomed to resistance from its prey or the objects of its interest. At last, the bear hesitated, ears twitching toward the sound of shouting and the hiss of flares fired by Ben to repel it. Sparks streaked across the air, hissing into the river's mist, startling the predator and forcing it to reconsider the risk. With a final glance at the spinning raft, the bear lumbered backward, massive paws leaving deep impressions in the soft riverbank, then vanished into the shadows of the dense spruce forest, moving with surprising speed for its bulk, leaving chaos in its wake, but no further harm. When calm returned, Ben and the group assessed the aftermath. The raft bore gashes along one side, ropes were tangled or missing, and several floating items were lost downstream. Scrapes and bruises marked bodies, clothing torn by sharp edges or the bear's claws, adrenaline still racing in every muscle. Each participant was soaked, trembling, acutely aware of how narrowly disaster had been avoided and how quickly the river adventure could have turned fatal. Authorities later examined the riverbank, noting paw prints pressed deep into the wet soil, claw marks on the raft, and scattered debris, as well as areas where the bear had tested its strength against human possessions. They emphasized that while brown bears typically avoid humans, encounters could become dangerous when animals were drawn by food or sudden movement, and that the combination of curiosity, hunger, and human presence could escalate within moments into a life-threatening situation. For Ben, seasoned in wilderness navigation, the incident reinforced the fragile balance between skill and circumstance. The river, already a test of human endurance and awareness, had become a battleground of instincts, where the raw power of the bear collided with human reflexes and quick thinking. The group's survival owed to calm improvisation, precise action, and the sheer luck of the predator retreating under duress. By evening, the river flowed silently past the clearing, the only evidence of the encounter being the gashes in the raft, missing gear, and deep paw prints pressed into the muddy bank. The group paddled slowly back to safer waters, their hearts still pounding as they reflected on the thin margin between adventure and catastrophe. The experience had left them soaked, bruised, and shaken, yet deeply respectful of the immense power of Alaska's brown bears and the unpredictable force of wilderness that could, in seconds, transform recreation into a desperate struggle for survival. Even after returning to camp, memories of the bear's presence lingered in their minds. The sound of paws striking the raft, the teeth and claws tearing through equipment, the violent spray of water as the raft rocked under assault, and the fleeting moments when instinct, strength, and skill merged to prevent tragedy. For Ben and his group, the river remained both beautiful and unforgiving, a place of exhilaration and danger, where every current and shadow reminded them of the delicate balance between human courage and nature's raw, untamed force.